Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about synergy between lifts. And what I mean by synergy is really my own way of talking about carryover. And I think people need to really look at their lifts that way. And it's just a different way of looking at them. And it might seem like a minor point, and in many cases it is. But what I mean is that we all have primary lifts that we know that we are using as our main size and strength builders, right? And it might be bench press, deadlift, things like that. It doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. As I've said before, I think the big three and a lot of their complementary lifts are some of the most amazing size and strength builders out there, but it is certainly possible to reach maximum jactitude and even get insanely strong without doing any of them. It's totally possible. I just don't think that it's the wisest way to go. Doesn't mean it can't be done though. And that's the difference. So perfect example, we look at something like the deadlift, which I'll show in here for you guys at some point, just a deadlift. All right, so you take a conventional deadlift, but then we start saying, okay, well, what are complementary lifts that can improve my deadlift? And how do we create a synergy here? Because I think the point I want to make is that there are going to be cases where your barbell curls, and this is going to sound ridiculous, where your barbell curls may actually help your deadlift in the grand scheme of the total synergy of your program. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. I'm not even going to talk about dividing things into accessory versus assistance exercises. I think the whole point that we need to look at is looking at your program as a collective and your exercise choices and programming and focus at any given time. And I mean, the curl is where I'm going to go with this, because we'll look at a deadlift. And for most people who deadlift a lot, it's very common to see people row off of the floor, right? And usually with a row, when you look at any rowing done from the floor, if your setup position is relatively similar to your deadlift, maybe like right before your hip drop is a perfect example, because you guys will notice if you look at say my rows from the floor versus the pre-motor unit slack technique I use oftentimes on the deadlift, I'm at a very similar starting hip position up top, similar torso position. It's not perfect because it would be way over exaggerated with your shoulders past the bar and everything. But we know that rows in general do train you to use your lats and your hips at the same time, because there is a certain amount of spinal erector and hip and posterior chain involved in a row that you don't get always on exercises like pull-ups and chin-ups, which I also think are fantastic exercises, by the way. I'm actually a big fan of weighted pull-ups and chin-ups. You guys know that. I've done tons of them on camera over the last year. Tons of them, including you guys have seen me do like a 100-pound dead hang chin-up, while being at a much heavier body weight than I am now before I started cutting. But we'll look at a row, and we know that it carries over in terms of pulling a weight from a floor with a lot more volume than you can handle on deadlift volume. Helps build up the lats, and if we look at the EMG data, we know lats and traps are tremendously involved with the deadlift, no matter what anyone tells you they are. Strong lats will help with your deadlift, and it trains you to contract the lats explosively from the floor while still engaging the posterior chain to some extent. Even though it's not a primary mover, it's still braced and it is still utilized. And it helps train your grip. It's a good grip exercise on top of it for a lot of volume. So it carries over well, but for a lot of people, rows, and myself included, for me, biceps are oftentimes a weak link on my rows. So I like to do cheat curls. Yes, I'm doing cheat curls to help grow my biceps, but what do we know about cheat curls? When we start adding shoulder extension and cheating and everything else, it turns it into a multi-joint movement. Well, when we look at studies, multi-joint movements improve strength more than single joint movements, even when hypertrophy is similar. It's a subtle difference, but the point is the same. It's going to make the biceps themselves stronger overall. Well, if that stronger bicep allows you to be stronger on the rows, then you're going to get even better lat development, better back development, and everything else from your rows, because your biceps are stronger and now allow you to move more weight with the same form. And if your back gets even stronger from the rows, particularly those rows off the floor, it will improve your deadlift. So when you look at it from that perspective, it makes sense that it could help with your deadlifting. Not a guarantee that it will, but it's through an indirect route. But it's creating a total synergy in your program. So you look at these things and say, well, a lot of people say, well, I want to try to isolate the bicep. But I'm like, yeah, but if your biceps get as strong as possible and you make them stronger, it will carry over to your rows, which will carry over to your back development, which will carry over to your deadlift, which will make everything bigger and stronger. You create a synergy. You know, and the same could be said for, let's say, the bench pressing. Now, I like to do a lot of closed grip bench pressing. Why? Because I can do more volume with it. We have a longer range of motion than a wider grip bench press. Some people, myself included, feel that it's slightly better for overall hypertrophy, even though you're forced to use a slightly lighter weight, better tricep development. Arguably, some physiologists argue better pec development. I don't necessarily agree with that line of thinking. I'd say it's possible, but I think definitely a little more tricep development. And because it's easier on your shoulder joints, you can tolerate higher volumes of it. So therefore, it is a really, really good all-around size and strength tool. What do we know about the standing press, or just the press as it's called? Usually the press done correctly is going to be a relatively narrow grip. Well, incidentally, I like to do the press with the exact same grip width that I use on my closed grip bench press. It might seem like a minor point, but if I'm training everything to be used to being right at that exact identical grip, the two exercises are going to feed into each other. There's going to be better carryover. Again, it's a subtle difference. But if you start thinking of your program like that at all times, of saying, okay, yes, I know I need to do an overhead press, because, you know, the press in general is a great all-around exercise. You can put a lot of muscle mass on, and it helps make you just all-around strong to press a heavy weight over your head while standing up. But if you start thinking of these exercises in terms of which way am I doing it that's going to give me the most potential for carryover to another lift, such as, again, my closed grip bench press. Well, now we're thinking in terms of synergy. It's no longer just what is this exercise going to add in terms of size and strength. It's how do I go about performing it in such a way, such as, again, rowing off the floor for the deadlift, in such a way that might have the best potential strength carryover to go with the exercise that I gain with my other big exercise. And if you start formulating every single lift that you do in this manner, the potential for carryover is great. I mean, the West Side guys know that with their squatting and deadlifting. How many of them, when you look at their ultra wide box squats they do, they use a similar stance to their sumo deadlift? How many of them use a sumo deadlift? Anyone think it's coincidence? Ultra wide box squatters all use a sumo deadlift, or the majority of them do? Yeah, because the foot stance is similar. You're getting a very, very similar recruitment patterns of the hip, the adductors, everything else. So all their accessory lifts, including even their speed boxes, are done with a stance that is very, very close to both their competition squat and deadlift stance. Think that's coincidence? I don't think it is. Of course it's going to carry over. So thinking in terms of those foot positions, it matters. Same thing if you're going to do good mornings, or even say your Romanian deadlift, because those are going to tend to be a slightly different stance, because your deadlift stance and conventional deadlift is usually going to be much narrower than those, unless you're really fat. You have to work around your belly. But thinking of it in terms of, does it look like my squat stance? Well, if you're a high bar squatter and you're doing those good mornings or Romanian deadlifts or whatever you're doing as your hip hinge movement for overall hypertrophy, maybe looking at little subtle things of, if my squat stance is identical to the stance I use on those, am I training everything, including my hips and spinal erectors, to work in that same, at least, pattern in terms of spacing? Yeah, and I think so. I think grip widths matter on that. I think things like pulling lifts from the floor instead of from a dead hang, such as, on a row, carries over to the deadlift better. We're creating a synergy between our lifts. And when you create a synergy between your lifts, you have more potential for overall gains in muscle mass, strength, all of these reasons that we lift. And I'm not saying you have to do this with every single exercise that you do, but we should be looking at our exercise choices and saying, hey, if I'm going to do this, what's going to be the best way for it to be synergistic with the rest of the training that I do from top to bottom? It's just a different way of looking at things instead of throwing them automatically into just accessory versus assistance movements. Maybe everything should in its own way be an assistance movement to the lifts that you care about the most. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.